You know, sometimes it's really hard to explain just how deluded and irrational a person's thinking when they're in the throes of addiction. But I think you're going to begin to get an idea. But this case really is going to give you an inside look at what goes on in the thinking of someone struggling with an addiction. Today we're going to be talking about the case of Kyle Navin, who murdered his parents in August 2015. Now the reason why I'm covering this story for you is because we're going to be talking about how Kyle's addiction really was at the center of what happened here. For those of you who are new here, I'm Amber Hollingsworth and you're watching Put the Shovel Down. This YouTube channel is all about helping you understand the science and psychology of addiction so you can get your life and your family back on track. And sometimes the best way to explain it to you is to give you an example, which is what we're going to do here today. So first I'm going to give you the details of this story, and then I'll weigh in on the role of addiction in this case so that you can understand how does someone get to this point, get to the point where they're so addicted that they're willing to kill their closest family members and loved ones in order to continue that addiction. So this story takes place in Fairfield, Connecticut, which is one of these idyllic towns where you have a lot of families and business people. Now Jeanette and Jeffrey Navin started their own business of trash removal. In fact, they started with just 2 trucks and they built this business into a very successful business. They worked hard, they put the time in, and were ultimately able to build a successful business. And they were both very involved in their community. Now they had 2 sons. Their 2 sons were Kyle and Taylor, who, like many of the kids in this town, played hockey growing up. In fact, Kyle was one of the star players on the hockey team. And ultimately, because of hockey, he sustained a back injury, which is where it's believed that the addiction problems began. Now Taylor chose to pursue golf. He kind of went his own way and didn't really work in the family business. But Kyle actually did work for the family business. In fact, he drove one of the trash trucks. Now it became more and more obvious that his addiction was progressing, his behavior was more and more irresponsible, but ultimately Jeffrey and Jeanette bought him a house, and Kyle and his girlfriend at the time, Jennifer Valienteto, lived in this house. Now Kyle would drive the trash truck and oftentimes Jennifer would come along with him, and they would even bring along their 2 dogs. But behind the scenes of what seems like a really happy, healthy, and hardworking family, there was a darkness that was growing in Kyle. Now his parents had actually just sold their really expensive, I think like $1.3 million house. They had just sold that house and they were going to downsize, and they were about to sell their business. And this is really where I think things get complicated, because Kyle had worked for the business, and I'm guessing, and I'll speak more about this in a minute, that Kyle thought that they would leave the business to him, but if they sold it, that really put his job and his future in jeopardy, because it probably meant he was going to have to find his own way. Now just hang on to that, because we're going to come back to it. So it was on August 4th that Jeffrey and Jeanette were reported missing, I believe by Jeanette's sister. So naturally the police start to investigate, you know, where are they, what happened? And at first they think, well, maybe they just went on a vacation. There were some things that just seemed a little fishy. Like for one, their cell phone was off. In fact, it had been off for like 3 days. And as a business owner, that's just really unusual to turn your cell phone off and be completely non-reachable for that long. Now, of course, they went to interview Kyle to see if there's anything Kyle knew about what was going on with his parents and if he knew where they were. Well, when they first talked to Kyle, basically he said that the last time he'd seen his parents, they'd actually come by his house, invite him to come for dinner, but that his back was hurting, so he didn't end up going. But later he gave a whole different story about when the last time he saw his parents. In fact, it came out that Kyle and his mom met on the day that they went missing, and Kyle was talking to her about having problems with his back. So she ended up going on the trash run with him. He drove the truck, and she actually rode on the back of the truck collecting the trash. And then it also came out that after that there were some text exchange between him and his dad Jeffrey, in which the dad said to him, hey, what's happened? Did you do something to mom? Another text from the dad that said, are you trying to set me up? So clearly the dad was suspicious, and for him to come to that conclusion and say that to his son, my guess is there'd either been some history of violent arguments or some kind of threats in the past, because who really says that to their son unless there's something that's making you think that? Now, of course, as the police investigation continues to go, they uncover more and more and more evidence of what actually happened. In fact, it turns out that just about a month prior to when Jeffrey and Jeanette went missing, there was some text exchange between Kyle and his girlfriend Jennifer about how good it would be if they could get a hold of the parents' money. And Kyle was saying things like, we could live the life we always wanted to live, and we could go on vacation, and we could have a nice home for us and the dogs. And you could really tell that Kyle was already thinking about, how can I get a hold of that money? Now, fast forward a little bit to August 13th, when the police obtained a warrant and were able to search Kyle's home. And in his home, they found 2 guns, numerous rounds of ammunition, empty heroin bags, needles, empty prescriptions for oxycodone, and other prescription meds. And they found a receipt from Home Depot where right around when the murders happened, there was a purchase for trash bags and stain remover. Now, as you can see, the evidence is starting to mount. And eventually, in November 2017, Jennifer Valienteto actually pled guilty to helping Kyle cover up what happened in these murders. Well, actually, she didn't really plead like regular guilty. She pled some kind of guilty that says, hey, I'm not saying I'm guilty. I'm just saying that I know there's a lot of evidence here and I probably won't win this case. But of course, there's still a really strong case against Kyle at this point. Literally on the night before, Kyle decided to plead guilty to these charges, and he received 55 years in prison. Now, Jennifer only received 8 years for her part in helping to commit these murders. Okay, so now that you have the details and the facts about the case and what happened, I'm going to weigh in for you about what I think can possibly be going on in the psychology of both Kyle and Jennifer, and how they got to the point that they were willing to kill 2 people in order to avoid being cut off. But I want you to know, everything that I'm about to say from this point forward really is just speculation based on my experience of working with people and families with addiction for a long time now. I'm going to talk about what I think that they could have been thinking. You see, this case first came to my attention. My husband actually said, hey, this may be a good case for you to cover because it's all about addiction, because the Oxygen Network recently covered this case on their show Killer Couples. And they really focused on the dynamic between Kyle and Jennifer and how this couple together committed this crime. In fact, there's a lot of reports out there referring to Jennifer as a Lady Macbeth, and there were some things in that story about her sort of goading him on. Now, obviously, I don't know all about the dynamics between these 2 people or what he said to her or she said to him, but I do know a lot about what goes on in the mind and thinking when someone's in active addiction. And so because of that, here's what I suspect happened. You see, when someone is really in the dark depths of addiction, they do a lot of things that they feel bad, guilty, and shameful about. And as a response to that feeling guilty and shameful, they often create this villain sort of story or narrative in their thinking to justify why they're taking the actions that they're taking. And most often, if it's a young person using substances, they blame one or both of the parents in some way. If it's an adult using substances, they may blame the spouse or a boss or something that happened in their childhood. It's kind of a psychological defense mechanism of how people struggling with an addiction make sense of their own behavior. So I'm guessing that Kyle probably had it in his head that he was being mistreated or unfairly treated by his parents. And that was probably really ramping up when he found out that they sold the business and he wasn't going to be getting the business. In his mind, I'm sure that was really unfair. Now, in the minds of his parents, my guess is that they were really, really scared to leave him that business or leave him a lot of money because they knew he was struggling with an addiction. And we see this kind of scenario in our office all the time. We see a lot of business owners who have children who are struggling with an addiction, and they really get sort of caught in this trap when it comes to helping financially, or even like, how much money to leave in the will and all that kind of stuff. And I think, and Kyle's parents were no doubt very worried about that, which I'm guessing had a lot to do with why they chose to sell the business. I think that they thought if Kyle got a hold of that money, it could very well kill him because of his addiction. And I'm guessing in addition to that, that they were getting a little bit frustrated. You know, they had bought him this house. I'm sure that they had been covering for him in a lot of ways for quite a while, actually. And it just wasn't getting better. Now, there were some reports in this story that Jennifer, the girlfriend, was helping to manage Kyle's addiction by holding the medications, the pain meds. And I don't know if this was true or not. Now, if that were the case, then my guess is that was her way of trying to help him conquer his addiction. Because part of me initially thought, well, maybe she was using with him. And that could totally have been the case, but I'm really not sure if that's what was going on there or if he really had her sucked into it. Because remember how I told you that people with addictions, they develop this victim story in their head, or this villain story where someone's not treating them right and they're being done wrong, and it kind of serves as this distraction and justification for what's going on with them. Well, the other thing you should know is that a person struggling with an addiction, because they have this narrative, they typically split family and friends against each other. And I think that Kyle was splitting the girlfriend against the parents. My guess is Kyle was telling the girlfriend all these negative things that he had in his mind against his parent. And he was probably saying, you know, I have this addiction, but I'm trying to get better. You're helping me. You're managing the meds. You know, you're helping me by holding my medications, this, that, and the other. Now, there are two reasons why I think that Kyle was probably splitting Jennifer against the parents. One is because that's typically almost always the case in these addicted family systems. And secondly, because the text between Kyle and Jennifer really just talked about money and lifestyle. It wasn't like, and we can get this money, you know, and then we can, you know, do as much drugs as we want to and live happily ever after with plenty of money for drugs. It was about, hey, we could have this lifestyle. So my guess is he was probably playing her to some degree. And the other reason I think that is because there was some kind of text from her to him saying, hey, you're getting played, which in the Oxygen Network view of this story really played it up like she's goading him on, which I think there probably was some of that. But my guess is, like I said, behind the scenes, he was telling her this other story. Now, definitely don't take this as me saying, oh, she's innocent and she's a victim here. That is not what I'm saying, because she knew that he was thinking about getting rid of his parents, and she knew that he did it, and she helped him do it. So it doesn't matter why she thought he was doing that. She was absolutely involved in this case and for sure guilty of what she was charged with. But the big thing that I really want you to understand and take away from regarding this case is just how twisted your thoughts can become when they're in active addiction. Because most people, they look at cases like this and they think, oh, he must have been a narcissist, he must have been antisocial, he must just have been an awful person from the beginning, because how could he have done something so horrible? But from everything that I saw and everything that I read, this was a good family. This was a good kid that developed an addiction. And addiction changes your brain in such a way that you will have narcissistic behaviors and you will have antisocial behaviors. The scary thing is that any of us could develop an addiction. And even scarier, that that addiction could take us to a place where our thinking is so diluted that we end up doing things that we would never have done otherwise. Now, I don't want you to think that everyone who has an addiction is going to murder someone close to them. That's not what I'm saying. But I will say to you that almost everyone that has an addiction ends up doing some things that they really regret. Now, of course, this is a tragic, horrible case, but there are some lessons to be learned here about just how diluted you can get when you're in active addiction. In fact, if you've ever struggled with an addiction now or in the past, or you have a loved one who struggled with an addiction now or in the past, how did it change your thinking? How did it change their thinking? Did you find yourself doing things that you never thought you would do? Now, up next, I have another true crime video for you about how addictive thinking can lead us to do some really bad things.